Hi, I'm Carissa from Three Bridges Yoga, and today I'm talking about the hands. So the hands specific to hand placement on the mat in wrist-loading yoga poses, poses like your table pose, plank pose, and downward facing dog pose. So I see a lot of common hand placement errors on the mat, which over the course of time will lead students to have discomfort in their wrists. And if it's not corrected, that discomfort will quickly turn into a more severe pain and can even become a full-fledged injury. So today I'd like to review not only hand placement, but ways in which you can increase the surface area of your hands, your fingers, and how to utilize that surface area when your palms are face down onto the floor. So because a lot of our daily activities today involve finger flexion, so whether it's doing a lot of driving, holding your steering wheel, writing, typing, texting, all of these actions when the fingers are flexing, it's making it harder to fully extend through your fingers because these muscles start to shorten. Okay? And we really need full finger extension as well as abduction, the spread of the fingers when the palms are face down. So we're going to start with some active isolated stretching. Active isolated stretching is a wonderful stretching technique in that it really works to lengthen the target muscles without triggering the stretch reflex. So the first stretch we're going to do is for our finger flexors. Okay. So start by taking your right palm face up, and with your left hand wrap your right index finger. Now really important here as we move through all the fingers, you want to make sure that you're supporting at the MP joint, so it's the base knuckle. You're supporting with your left thumb right there. And then other four fingers can wrap around the top. So you're going to pull the right finger back into some easy extension, and then just for 2 seconds, you're going to pull it to its maximum range. 1, 2, and then release. Okay, and do the same thing with the middle finger. Pull it back, hold it for 1, 2, release. And then at the ring finger, 1, 2, pinky. So supporting the MP joint, and then reach around for the thumb, and you're pulling the thumb back towards the back side of the hand for 1, 2. And then you can go through and do that again with each finger. And 2-second hold is critical. I'm pulling it back, 1, 2. Okay. So ideally with all these stretches that we're going to do today, you want to do 10 repetitions of each stretch. So we're only going to do a couple together, but 10 of each stretch, then obviously right and left, make sure you do both sides equally. Okay? So then the next stretch we're going to do is for our finger adductors. So the adductors are the muscles that pull the fingers together. So in order to get a nice spread of the fingers for abduction, we want to stretch those muscles that pull the fingers together. So for this one, we're going to take our thumb and then index finger and middle finger together. So you take the thumb and place it to the inside of your right index finger, and then the middle finger to the inside of your right middle finger. And then just like you make the sign peace, you're going to pull the fingers apart for 1, 2. And then you're going to do the middle finger and the ring finger for 1, 2. And then the ring finger and the pinky for 1, 2. And you can go and do it twice more. So these stretches are really great to do, guys, when you get to yoga class early. You have a few minutes to spare. Really good to prepare your hands for the practice, especially your Vinyasa practice. And then after that, anything that feels good. Sometimes a nice flick of the fingers can be really helpful. Okay? So in a lot of these wrist loading poses, you're doing some pretty deep wrist extension. So the wrist extensors live on the back side of the arm. So in order to stretch them, we're going to want to do the opposite action, which is wrist flexion. So for that, take your arms straight out and turn your fingers down so your palm faces towards you. Okay? Left hand grabs a hold of the right hand, and you're holding above the fingers, and then you're going to pull the fingers back towards the body for 1, 2, and then return it to a neutral position. Pull it back, 1, 2, return to neutral, and again, 1, 2, return to neutral. Okay? Now turn the palm to face up. To stretch the wrist flexors, you're doing the opposite action. You're actually doing wrist extension here. So palm faces away, finger points down. Reach with your left hand to your right, and then pull the hand back towards the body for 1, 2. 1, 2. 1, 2. Okay, but again, you would go through that 10 times. Now the last stretch that we're going to do is supination and pronation. Supination is when you turn your palm to face up, and pronation is when you turn your palm to face down. Now, pronation is really crucial when you're in your wrist loading yoga poses, and especially in downward facing dog. Really want to get a good sense of pronation there to ground down through the inner edges of your hands. So to pronate more easily, we want to stretch our supinators. So you're going to reach your left hand around for the hypothenar eminence, which is this part of the palm right here on the pinky side. So you're going to reach around, grab a good solid hold on that, and then turn the palm away from you for 1, 2. 1, 2. 1, 2. Now it's also very important that when you're doing the supination and pronation that your upper arm remains glued into your torso, so that way there you're isolating the movement in the forearm and not engaging the shoulder joint at all. Okay, so turn your palm to face up. To stretch your pronators, you'll do supination. So reach your left hand for the thenar eminence. Again, thenar eminence now is just the thumb side. Think of the heel of your hand. Get a good solid hold there, and then pull the palm away from you for 1, 2. Back to neutral. 1, 2. 1, 2. Okay, so again, going through all those stretches, 10 repetitions. You can probably easily get through all those stretches in under 10 minutes. Okay, so if you have 10 minutes to spare when you get to yoga class, that's how you should spend your time. Okay. So we're going to come forward into table pose now and kind of put it into action. So what happens a lot of times is initially the inner edge of the hand, so you'll see here, the inner edge of the hand tends to pop up away from the floor and weight tends to roll to the outer wrist joint. When that happens, it actually ends up by compressing the outer wrist joint. And that compression over time, because this joint is relatively small, is going to be a big source of pain and discomfort for a lot of people. So in order to make full contact with the inner edge of your hand, so you don't want this space here, you're going to want to more actively pronate so you can press the inner edge of the hand down. Now the other mistake that we commonly see is people gripping with their fingers. So notice when the fingers grip, now you also have space underneath your fingers. So again, that surface area that you're not utilizing. So these middle knuckles, you want them to connect down to the floor as well. Okay, so all knuckles of every finger should be connecting down to the mat. And most importantly is going to be that inner edge of the hand. So ideally, you want to have equal space between the floor and the inner wrist and the floor and the outer wrist. So more commonly than not, the inner wrist has more space, right, to the floor than the outer wrist because the tendency is to roll outward. So as you come into your table pose, really give yourself a good strong sense of pronation, of rolling down through the inner edges of your hands. Now, generally speaking, if you have your inner wrist lined up with the outer edge of your clavicle, that's a pretty good alignment for judging shoulder width apart where you want your hands. Certainly every body is different, so you want to make sure that you find a position that's comfortable for you. But generally, lining up the inner edge of your wrist to the outer edge of your clavicle will be pretty helpful. And then if you were to draw a line between the index finger and the middle finger, that line should be parallel to the long edge of your mat. Again, this is just generally speaking. The wrist creases in general will be parallel to the short edge of your mat. So you can use that sort of as a base for creating your starting point in these poses. Okay? So a good practice for you is from table pose to come back to child's pose, pressing your heels back and reaching your arms forward. So instead of using child's pose, in this case as a pose of rest, try to keep it active by continuing to ground down through the base knuckles of your index finger, your thumb, and also every knuckle of every finger. Okay, and then feel the shift here from the inner edges to the outer edges of your wrists and try to find a nice level point where you have equal space between the floor and the inner edge of your wrist, the floor and the outer edge of your wrist. So your elbows are lifted, your arms are strong and straight, and you can see here there's no crease in the wrist, so there's no wrist extension. It's relatively a neutral position. Now as you inhale and come forward, this is when you come into your wrist extension, right? So your thumbs generally, again, moving towards one another, and your wrist creases parallel to the top edge of your mat. Now maintaining that press through the inner rims of your hands, send your hips back to your heels, and then just do this a few times. So really you're working on just grounding that energy through the inner rims of your hands, and learning how to shift weight from the heels of your hands. So here, learning how to shift your weight from the heels of your hands more towards these base knuckles. Okay, so next time you press your hips back to your heels, tuck your toes under, and then bring yourself up into downward facing dog. So just notice right away what happens to the weight. Where does it shift? Typically for most of us, the weight's going to naturally want to shift to the outer edge. So again, you're going to find that space between the inner rim of your hand and even some space between the middle knuckles and the floor. Okay, so you want to utilize the surface area of your hand, ground down equally, okay, all fingers pressing down, not gripping. So as weight shifts forward towards the base knuckles, it's coming out of the heels of your hands and you're sending your weight further back. Now, one thing that tends to happen that you need to be aware of is that when you do pronate, sometimes there's a tendency for the upper arm bones to want to roll in and the shoulders to crowd forward. So we need to have pronation, but at the same time, draw the shoulders back and down. Okay, so you're still finding a lot of width across your collarbones. So notice next time when you're in downward facing dog, if you were to bend your elbows out, kind of creating like a little diamond shape, and then roll your elbows down and under, that should help you to create some space between your shoulders and your ears, yet still allow you to have grounding through the inner rims of your hands. So a lot of this foundational work can seem pretty tedious, especially if you've been practicing for a long time. But taking the time to build a strong foundation is going to help you to build a practice that's going to be sustainable, one that you can continue for a long time, especially if you love Vinyasa, where there's a lot of wrist extension, a lot of wrist loading, not only through the flow, but a lot of the arm balancing postures as well. So taking time to really steady your base is going to be super important. So I hope you found today's lesson helpful, and I thank you for watching. Namaste.